The chill of the early morning air bit at Allison Montgomery's cheeks as she stood before the fresh, broken ground. Her gloved hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the ache that had settled deep inside her chest. Goodbye. The words slipped past her lips, fragile and final, carried off by the wind as if the universe itself didn't want her to hold on. The grass around the grave was still damp with dew, and Allison's black heels sank slightly into the earth. She didn't mind. A part of her felt she deserved to sink, to disappear into the ground with him. Her husband, Ethan, was gone. A firefighter, a hero, they all said. But those words were hollow now, leaving her with nothing but an empty apartment and a silence. So heavy, it pressed down on her like a weight. She closed her eyes, and the memory slammed into her. The siren wailing, the phone call in the middle of the night, the unbearable words. The building collapsed just as he was exiting. He had been seconds away from safety, and yet fate had stolen him from her. Every time she heard a siren now, her heart leapt into her throat as though history were looping back, cruel and relentless. Their apartment, the place they had shared for 4 years, had become unbearable. Every corner echoed with Ethan's laughter. Every shadow whispered of the life they had built together. Even the faint scent of smoke that clung to his jacket, still hanging by the door, was both comfort and torment. She couldn't breathe there anymore. She couldn't heal surrounded by ghosts. "Allie, you need to live." His voice replayed in her head, soft and teasing, from some distant memory. She wondered if he would approve of what she was about to do. Pack her things, leave the city, and start over somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from fire stations, sirens, and the memories that sliced her open each night. Allison knelt, tracing the carved letters of his name with her fingertips. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered, her throat tightening, "but I'll try. For you." The wind stirred, rustling the nearby trees, and in that fleeting sound, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that Ethan was answering her. With tears glistening in her eyes, Allison rose to her feet. It was time to leave the graveyard, the city, and the life that had been stolen from her. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a new chapter waited. The tires crunched over the gravel driveway as Allison pulled up to the small rental house. The sun had already begun its descent, casting long golden streaks across the quiet street. For the first time in weeks, there were no blaring sirens, no flashing red lights, just the gentle hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. She cut, the engine sitting in the stillness for a moment. This was supposed to be her fresh start, the quiet she had prayed for, but as she glanced at the shadowy outline of the little house, white paint peeling in some places, she wasn't sure if she felt relief or dread. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She reached for it, wiping at her tired eyes before answering. "Hey, baby girl, how are you holding up?" The voice on the other end belonged to Brooke, her older sister, the one who had been her anchor since childhood. Allison exhaled slowly. "Just arrived," she said, her voice low. "What time will you be here tomorrow with the moving truck?" "They said we should be there by noon," Brooke replied with her usual calm. "You sure you don't want me to drive down tonight?" "No," Allison said quickly. "I'll be fine. I'm going to stop at a diner for dinner and then settle in. I'm drained." "Allison, it's only an hour away from the city. Is there something wrong?" She closed, her eyes resting her head against the seat. "No, I've just been awake since 3 this morning. Leaving was harder than I thought." A pause. Then Brooke's voice softened. "Okay, sweetheart. Call me if you need anything." "Always," Allison whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. After ending the call, she climbed out of the car. Just as the landlord promised, the keys were tucked neatly inside the mailbox. With trembling hands, she unlocked the front door. The faint scent of dust and wood greeted her as she stepped into the empty house. She set her purse down on the hardwood floor, and the weight of everything she had held in finally broke her open. Knees buckling, Allison sank to the floor and wept, deep, aching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried until her tears gave out, until the silence of the house wrapped around her like a hollow embrace. And when there was nothing left inside her to spill, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. A soft knock echoed through the quiet house, pulling Allison out of a restless sleep. She had drifted off on the couch sometime after midnight, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Blinking against the early morning light streaming through the blinds, she sat up and smoothed her hair before answering the door. On the other side stood a petite, older woman with silver hair swept into a neat bun. She held a bakery box in her hands and wore a warm, expectant smile. "Good morning, dear. You must be Allison Montgomery," the woman said cheerfully. "I'm Mrs. Carol Knightley, your landlord. I thought I'd bring over a little welcome gift." She lifted the box slightly. "Pastries from the bakery down on Main Street. Best in Sunny Ridge." Surprised by the kindness, Allison opened the door wider. "Oh, that's very thoughtful. Thank you." Mrs. Knightley stepped inside just far enough to hand her the box, her eyes flicking around the bare living room with a nod of approval. "The house has been empty for a while, but it's sturdy. My son will be over later this week to check on the place, to do any repairs that need tending to. He's handy with a toolbox." Allison gave a small smile. "I can take care of repairs myself. I'm pretty capable with a hammer." Mrs. Knightley let out a gentle laugh, brushing off the offer with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, dear. That's what he's here for. Besides, we don't let our new folks lift a finger until they've settled in. Sunny Ridge is a close-knit community. You'll learn quickly enough. If you need anything, don't be afraid to ask." There was something reassuring in her tone, as though she weren't just speaking of broken pipes and squeaky doors, but of heavier burdens too. Allison felt the corners of her throat tighten, though she swallowed the emotion down and nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Knightley. I really appreciate it." The older woman gave her a knowing smile and patted her arm gently before heading back toward the porch. "Rest today, Allison. Let us welcome you properly when you're ready." And just like that, the door closed behind her, leaving Allison with a box of pastries, the faint smell of cinnamon and sugar filling the empty air. She stared at it for a long moment, a strange warmth stirring in her chest. Perhaps Sunny Ridge truly could be the fresh start she was searching for. By mid-morning, Allison had thrown herself into cleaning every corner of the little house. Dusting shelves, wiping counters, scrubbing the floors. It wasn't just about tidying, it was about distracting her restless mind. The hum of activity kept her from thinking too much, from sinking back into the heaviness of the past. The rumble of a truck engine pulled her from her task. She hurried to the front door and stepped outside, just as the moving truck pulled into the driveway. When Brooke climbed out of her car behind it, Allison felt her chest loosen. She rushed forward, wrapping her big sister in a long, tight embrace. "You made it," Allison whispered into her shoulder, holding on a little longer than she meant to. "Of course I did," Brooke said softly, squeezing back just as firmly. "You didn't think I'd let you face all this alone, did you?" Together, they followed the movers inside, Allison giving Brooke her first tour of the little house. It was modest and a little worn, but it carried a quiet charm. When they reached the back porch, Allison paused, her eyes softening at the sight beyond it. A patch of wildflowers stretched out behind the yard, purples, yellows, and pinks, swaying gently in the late summer breeze. "This," Allison said with a faint smile, "is my favorite spot." Brooke leaned against the railing, nodding with approval. "I can see why. It's peaceful. You deserve that." Once the movers left, the sisters worked quickly, unpacking box after box until the house began to feel less like a shell and more like a home. They laughed at small things, old photographs tucked into random boxes, dishes wrapped haphazardly, but there was an unspoken rule between them. They didn't talk about Ethan. Not yet. His absence filled the room like a shadow, but neither dared break the fragile calm by naming it aloud. When Brooke finally left, the house seemed to exhale, falling into silence. The laughter, the chatter, the warmth, all of it faded with the sound of Brooke's car pulling away, and once again Allison was left with only herself, the creak of the old house, and the quiet weight of her memories. The low hum of a lawnmower pulled Allison from sleep, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. But as her eyes fluttered open, the steady rumble continued, growing louder and more insistent. She rolled over, glancing at the clock. 6:30 a.m. Her brows furrowed. Dragging herself to the window, she pulled back the curtain and nearly gasped. A man was riding on a lawnmower, going across her overgrown yard, his movements steady and purposeful. The fresh-cut smell of grass drifted in through the small crack in the window. For a brief second, annoyance prickled through her chest. Who started mowing a stranger's yard at this hour? Her first instinct was to march outside and demand peace, but she stopped herself. The truth was, the lawn did need cutting, and she had no tools or energy to handle it. With a weary sigh, she let the curtain fall back in place. Nearly an hour later, just as she was beginning to relax again, the high-pitched whine of a weed-eater buzzed through the morning air. Allison groaned, pressing her palms to her temples. Peace. That was all she wanted. Silence to sit with her grief. Instead, it felt like her new home was buzzing with unwelcome intrusion. Her phone chimed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and read a cheerful message from Mrs. Knightley. "Hope my son is doing a great job on your lawn." Allison's irritation softened a little. This wasn't some random act of noise. It was kindness. She sighed, pulling 2 bottles of water from the fridge. A thank you was the least she could offer. When she opened the front door, she froze. A golden retriever was sitting on her porch, tail stretched lazily behind him as if he had claimed the space as his own. The dog lifted his head at the sound of the door, amber eyes calm and curious, before resting it back on his paws as though she were no threat at all. The man with the mower stopped, shutting off the machine, and walked toward her. Sweat dampened his t-shirt, and grass clippings clung to his shoes. He gave a small, polite smile. "That's Rusty," he said, gesturing toward the retriever. "He grew up here. This used to be my grandfather's house, so it's like a second home to him." Allison bent slightly, meeting the dog's gaze. Rusty gave her a slow blink, then let out a content sigh. "Well," she said softly, "he seems comfortable enough." Straightening, she handed the man the water bottles. "Hi, I'm Allison. Thank you for the yard work. I wasn't expecting it." "Joseph," he replied, taking the water with a nod. "You're welcome. I'm almost done, so I'll be out of your way soon." Allison gave a polite smile and slipped back inside, closing the door gently. The next morning, Allison stood at the door in her running shoes, staring at the quiet road stretching out in front of her. Running used to be her sanctuary. Ethan had always teased her about it, saying she was chasing peace that she already carried inside. But since his death, she hadn't run once. Pushing the thought away, she opened the door. Rusty was stretched across the porch again, tail giving a lazy thump when he saw her. "Good morning, Rusty," she murmured, patting his head before stepping past him. The cool morning air filled her lungs as she jogged down the road. At first, it felt almost normal, her feet finding rhythm, her arms swinging steadily. But after only a few minutes, her chest grew heavy, her breaths short and uneven. The weight of exhaustion pressed down harder than she expected. By the time she turned back toward the house, she was walking slowly, sweat plastering her shirt to her skin. When she reached the porch, Rusty was waiting, head cocked as if in concern. She sat beside him, pressing her palms to her knees, fighting tears she didn't want to shed. Later that afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Knightley stood there, her sharp eyes narrowing the moment she saw Allison's pale face. "You don't look well," the older woman said firmly. "Come on, I'll take you to the doctor." "I'm fine," Allison protested, shaking her head. "It's just stress, nothing more." Mrs. Knightley folded her arms. "Stress or not, I'm not taking no for an answer." Too drained to argue, Allison found herself in a small clinic 30 minutes later. The physician asked her question after question about her health, her sleep, her grief. She answered mechanically, avoiding eye contact. By the time she stepped out into the waiting room, her face was pale, her expression shocked. Mrs. Knightley was on her feet immediately. "Come, dear." She guided Allison out, helping her into the car like she was made of glass. Back at the house, Allison sank into the couch, silent. Mrs. Knightley touched her shoulder gently. "I'll take your prescription to the pharmacy. Be back soon." When she returned with the small bag, she glanced at the label and softened, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, poor thing. Everything will be all right." She settled beside Allison, laying a comforting arm around her. "Are you ready to talk, Mommy?" The word cracked something open in Allison. Tears flowed before she could stop them. "I need Ethan. We were supposed to do this together. He was going to be the rotten parent while I disciplined him and our child. He's gone, and it's not fair. I want him here, with me, with our baby." Mrs. Knightley pulled her close, holding her, as tightly as if Allison were her own daughter. And for the first time in weeks, Allison let herself sob without restraint, the sound raw and aching in the small house. The next morning, Allison sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Her thumb hovered over the call button, her heart hammering. Telling her sister meant saying it out loud. It meant admitting what the doctor had told her yesterday, admitting what Ethan would never know. Finally, with trembling fingers, she pressed the screen, texting, "I need you. Can you come today?" Brooke arrived by noon, her arms full. She carried Allison's favorite sandwich from the deli she used to love back in the city, the kind Ethan used, to pick up for her on Saturdays. The familiar smell filled the kitchen as Brooke unpacked it, setting the meal on the counter without a word. They sat across from one another at the small wooden table. For a long while, neither spoke. Allison stared at her sandwich, appetite gone, while Brooke quietly sipped her coffee. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Brooke had always known when to speak and when to simply be there. Finally, Allison exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to tell you yesterday. I wasn't ready." Brooke reached across the table, covering Allison's, and with her own. "You don't have to say anything until you're ready." Tears welled in Allison's eyes, and her throat tightened. "I'm pregnant, Brooke. The doctor confirmed it yesterday." Brooke's eyes softened with both surprise and sympathy. She squeezed her sister's hand gently. "Oh, baby girl." Allison shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "We were supposed to do this together. Ethan was supposed to be here. He was going to be the silly one, the one who snuck candy. Before dinner, while I tried to be the responsible parent, he was supposed to hold me through this." Brooke rose, circling the table to pull Allison into a hug. I know it's not fair, but you're not alone. Not now, not ever." After a moment, Brooke leaned back, brushing away Allison's tears with her thumbs. "Are you coming back to the city? You'd have me, Mom. Everyone." Allison sniffled, shaking her head. "No, I'm getting used to this place. And I have a backyard." A small, fragile smile touched her lips. "Every kid deserves a backyard." Brooke smiled too, though her eyes shone with worry. She stayed the night, keeping Allison company in the quiet house, before returning to the city the next morning. And when the door closed behind her, boom. Silence settled in once again. Carol Knightley had quietly become Allison's mother hen. Every day, without fail, she either called to check in or stopped by with something. Fresh bread, a newspaper, a pot of soup, or just her calm, steady presence. It was comforting, though Allison sometimes wondered why the older woman seemed to care so much. One afternoon, they sat together on the back porch, steaming mugs of tea warming their hands. The late summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the yard, and for the first time in days, Allison felt almost at peace. "Mrs. Knightley," Allison began hesitantly, "why are you being so nice to me? You barely know me." Carol studied her for a long moment, her expression softening. "Because, dear, I know that kind of pain. I lost Joseph's father when he was just 12 years old. The grief nearly swallowed me whole. But the people of this town, they became my backbone. They held me up when I couldn't stand on my own." She reached across the table, taking Allison's hand gently. "You need that too. People here have been giving you space, but once they know you're expecting, your whole life will change. A new family will be established around you." Allison blinked, her throat tightening. "But why would they help me? I'm a stranger." Carol squeezed her hand firmly, her voice steady. "Because you need it, Allison, and in Sunny Ridge, that's enough." The months passed gently, each one softening the sharp edges of Allison's grief. As the leaves turned, so did her place in Sunny Ridge. The townspeople who had once kept their distance began to open their arms. Neighbors brought casseroles and baskets of fruit. The church women left handmade blankets on her porch, and friendly invitations to gatherings slipped into her mailbox. It was as if the town itself had decided she was one of their own. Through it all, Carol made sure Allison never felt alone. If she couldn't stop by herself, she sent Joseph in her place, always with some excuse, checking on the plumbing, mowing the lawn, carrying in groceries. It was during one of these visits, as Allison poured them both a glass of lemonade on the back porch, that she finally asked the question weighing on her heart. "Why does your mom make such a fuss over me?" Joseph leaned back in the chair, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Well, after me, she wasn't able to have any more children, and I think she's a little tired of waiting for a daughter-in-law." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not that she'll admit it. My last relationship was a disaster. You'd think she'd give up on matchmaking by now." The laughter between them came easily, and for the first time, Allison felt herself truly relax in his presence. What began as small talk stretched into something deeper. She told him about Ethan, how they met at a college bonfire, how he had swept her off her feet with his bravery and warmth, and how she had lost him that terrible night when the building collapsed. Her voice trembled, but Joseph listened without interruption, his expression steady, his eyes filled with quiet respect. When she finished, Joseph shared his own story. He spoke about the company he had once built from the ground up, the pride it brought him, and the pain of having to sell it after a partner's betrayal. He confessed how starting over in Sunny Ridge wasn't part of his plan either, but it was where he ended up. They talked for nearly 4 hours, their stories weaving together in the stillness of the porch. And through it all, Rusty sat beside Allison like a sentinel. His golden head rested on her knee, his watchful eyes scanning the horizon, as if guarding her from a world that had already taken too much. One stormy dawn, Allison found him shivering on the porch, terrified of the thunder. She opened the door, and he padded in as if he'd always belonged there. From that day forward, Rusty stopped waiting outside her front door each morning, and just like that, he made himself at home. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Winter settled over Sunny Ridge like a heavy quilt, blanketing the little town in silence. The roads were slick with ice, the trees stripped bare, and the cold seeped into the bones of the old house. But Allison never felt truly alone. Rusty had made it his mission to stay by her side, rarely leaving the warmth of her home. On those long winter days, when the ache of Ethan's absence crept in, she found comfort in the steady thump of the golden retriever's tail and the gentle weight of his head resting in her lap. By early February, Allison was 5 months pregnant. That morning, as she moved about the kitchen preparing breakfast, she suddenly felt the world tilt. A wave of dizziness crashed over her, followed by a sharp, piercing pain in her abdomen. She gasped, bracing herself against the counter. Panic clawed at her chest. Rusty immediately sprang to attention, circling her with low whines, his amber eyes fixed on her every movement. He seemed to sense something was terribly wrong. Allison tried to steady herself, but her phone was in. The bedroom. Too far, too impossible in that moment. Heart pounding, she stumbled to the back door, opened it with trembling hands, and without a word, Rusty bolted out into the icy morning. 15 agonizing minutes later, the front door burst open. Joseph rushed inside, snow still clinging to his coat. His eyes widened when he saw Allison slumped at the kitchen table, her knuckles white as she clung to the edge like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Allison!" His voice was raw with fear. In an instant he scooped her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of porcelain. She felt the warmth of his chest against her cheek, the rapid thud of his heartbeat as he carried her out into the biting cold. He laid her gently in the passenger seat of the SUV, fastening the belt with shaking hands before climbing in beside her. As the vehicle tore down the icy streets toward the hospital, Joseph gripped her hand tightly. "Stay with me, Allison. Just stay with me," he repeated, his knuckles white on the wheel. The world blurred past her. The cold, the fear, the pain. All she could focus on was Joseph's voice, steady, pleading, alive. At the hospital, the doctors worked quickly. The verdict came soon: extreme dehydration, worsened by stress and the toll of pregnancy. Relief washed over her when she heard the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat on the monitor. For 2 long days, Joseph never left her side. He sat in the stiff hospital chair, refusing to leave, even when the nurses urged him to rest. He held her hand when she drifted off to sleep, fetched water when she stirred, and reassured her with quiet words when fear threatened to overwhelm her. When Allison was finally discharged with orders for a week of strict bed rest, Joseph was the one who assisted her to the car, his arms steady around her shoulders. Rusty waited patiently in the back seat, tail thumping softly, as if he too had vowed never to leave her again. And in that moment, Allison realized she wasn't as alone in this world as she had once believed. Joseph carried her inside, carefully, lowering Allison onto the couch with the gentleness of someone who had been rehearsing the act for days. She wanted to protest, say she could manage, insist she wasn't fragile, but her body reminded her otherwise. The doctor's orders of bed rest clung to her, and she couldn't deny the relief of letting someone else take control, even for a little while. Rusty settled immediately at her feet, his warm body pressed protectively against her legs. Joseph crouched beside the couch, meeting her eyes. "You rest. I'll handle everything else," he said simply, as though it wasn't a favor but a promise. And he did. Over the next week, Joseph became a steady presence in her home. He brought meals, homemade chicken soup one day, hearty casseroles another, sometimes cooked by him, sometimes dropped off by Carol. He kept the fireplace burning so the chill of winter never reached her. He even ran errands she didn't ask. Stocking her fridge, shoveling her walkway, checking the mailbox. At first, Allison watched with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She had always prided herself on her independence, especially after Ethan's death, when standing on her own too. Feet had become a survival tactic, But with Joseph bustling around her kitchen, fixing her tea without being asked, she felt something she hadn't in months: safe. One evening, as the winter wind howled outside, she caught herself studying him. He was leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, drying a dish with easy focus. There was nothing extraordinary about the moment, yet her chest tightened unexpectedly. His presence filled the house in a way that wasn't intrusive, just steady, reliable. When he caught her watching, he smiled faintly. "What? Did I miss a spot?" She shook her head quickly, embarrassed. "No, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up the other morning." Joseph set the dish down, his expression softening. "Rusty gets all the credit. He wouldn't leave me alone until I followed him here. Smart dog." His gaze lingered on her, steady and reassuring. "But for what it's worth, Allison, you're not a burden. I want to be here." Her throat tightened at those words. She looked down, smoothing her hand over her growing stomach. "It's just strange. I got so used to being alone. Now I don't know what to do with someone standing beside me." Joseph crossed the room and crouched near her again, his voice low and certain. "Just let me stand here, for as long as you need." Rusty let out a soft huff, resting his chin on Allison's knee as if seconding the vow. For the first time since Ethan's death, Allison allowed herself to lean back into the moment. And though she wasn't ready to name the feeling yet, she knew something inside her had shifted. The snow had finally melted enough for Brooke and Marcus to make the drive to Sunny Ridge. Allison had barely finished brushing her hair when the front door swung open and her sister's voice filled the house. "Allison, where are you?" Brooke called, her tone edged with both worry and relief. Joseph, standing at the stove with a skillet in hand, glanced up from the sizzling eggs. "Bedroom," he answered easily, just as Brooke came bustling down the hallway. She didn't hesitate, throwing her arms around Allison in a fierce embrace that nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "I was so worried," Brooke whispered, before pulling back, studying her sister with sharp eyes. In the living room, Joseph met Marcus, who had stepped in more cautiously. The two men shook hands firmly, sizing one another up with the quiet politeness men often shared in unfamiliar company. Moments later, the four of them gathered at the kitchen table. The smell of bacon and buttered toast filled the air as Joseph placed plates before them. Brooke, never one to waste time, leaned forward. "So, Joseph," she began, her eyes narrowing slightly, "tell me about yourself. Who exactly is this man who's been watching over my sister?" "Brooke," Allison groaned, heat rushing to her cheeks. "Stop grilling him like he's on trial." But Joseph only chuckled, unfazed. "It's all right. I'd probably do the same if our places were reversed." With calm ease, he spoke about his work, how he once owned a small company before circumstances forced him to sell, how he'd returned to Sunny Ridge to regroup and help his mother. He even spoke warmly about Rusty, who sat dutifully at Allison's feet. After breakfast, Marcus stood and stretched. "I noticed you've got a room cleared out. Planning for the nursery?" Allison nodded. "Well then," Marcus grinned, clapping Joseph on the shoulder. "Why don't you give me a hand with some painting? It'll go quicker with two." Joseph agreed, and the two men disappeared down the hall to the nursery. Brooke wasted no time. She turned to Allison, her expression soft but direct. "All right. Tell me the truth. What's going on with you and Joseph?" Allison looked down at her tea, fingers tightening around the mug. I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes I think my feelings are real, but then the guilt hits me. Ethan hasn't even been gone that long. What if it's just loneliness? What if I'm just clinging to the first hand that reached for me?" Her voice broke, tears filling her eyes. "I'm grateful for him, for his mother, for Rusty. But Ethan was supposed to be here. I don't know how to let go of that. Brooke reached across the table, her voice steady. You don't have to figure it out right now. You've been through hell, Allie. Take the time you need. If your feelings for Joseph are real, they'll prove themselves. You'll know eventually, especially when this baby girl arrives. Allison's hand went instinctively to her stomach. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine both grief and hope coexisting. Maybe Brooke was right. Maybe time would tell. The sound of rollers sliding against fresh drywall echoed faintly down the hallway as Joseph and Marcus worked side by side in the nursery. The smell of paint clung thick in the air. So, Marcus said after a long stretch of silence, you've been spending a lot of time with Allison. Joseph glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. I suppose I have. Your wife seems to think I'm under interrogation. Guess it's your turn now. Marcus chuckled. Something like that. She's been through more than most people. Who could carry? I just need to know the man around her isn't here out of pity or convenience. Joseph's strokes slowed, his jaw tightening. I'm here because I want to be, because I chose to stay. Not because it's easy. It isn't, but because she deserves someone standing beside her, whatever form that takes. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded, a look of quiet approval settling on his face. Good answer. Joseph ran a hand along the wall, imagining the space filled with warmth, with laughter, with a child's presence. He didn't know what role he would play yet, but something inside him hoped he'd still be there when the room reached its full purpose. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Allison sat alone at the table, Brooke having gone into town for supplies. The quiet pressed against her as her thoughts turned inward. She traced the rim of her teacup, Brooke's words from earlier still circling in her mind. If your feelings are real, you'll know eventually. Her heart felt torn in two. On one side was Ethan, his memory still vivid, his voice echoing in her. Dreams, his absence a wound that never stopped aching. On the other side was Joseph, steady, kind, present in a way that both comforted and frightened her. Could she truly let someone else in without betraying Ethan's memory? Or was she just clinging to Joseph because she was tired of carrying the weight alone? Her gaze drifted toward the nursery door, where faint laughter broke through the sound of brushes against the wall. The sound tugged at her heart, stirring something she hadn't felt in so long, possibility. Rusty padded into the kitchen, resting his golden head on her lap as though sensing her turmoil. She stroked his fur, whispering to herself, what if Brooke is right? What if this is more than just loneliness? Tears stung her eyes, but they weren't only from sorrow this time. They were from the terrifying, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, life still had more to offer her than loss. By the time Allison reached her 8th month, the days seemed to stretch endlessly. Her body felt heavy, her emotions unpredictable. And though she tried to stay calm, anxiety lingered just beneath the surface. Every kick, every flutter of movement reminded her both of what she had lost and what she was about to gain. She wasn't alone in those anxious weeks. Carol and Joseph made sure of that. They accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, asking questions she was too overwhelmed to think of, keeping her company in waiting rooms and never letting her face those sterile halls without support. March came to a close. Carol left to visit her sister for a few days, promising to be back before the baby arrived. Joseph, meanwhile, had a friend's wedding in the city. One night, he had told Allison, and I'll be back tomorrow. Rusty, ever faithful, stayed behind, settling himself in as her golden guardian. That night, Allison moved slowly, through her kitchen, putting away dishes. A sudden, sharp pain seized her, stopping her mid-step. She gripped the counter, breathing through it until it passed. False labor, she told herself, just her body preparing. But as the hours slipped by, the pains grew sharper, closer together. Rusty became restless, pacing the length of the living room, ears perked and eyes on her, as if he knew better than she did. By 2 a.m., she couldn't deny it anymore. Her contractions had become steady, demanding her full attention. With trembling hands, she sent a mass text. "Dressing for the hospital, will send an update." Joseph's reply came almost instantly. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. By the time Allison opened her front door, another contraction hit, stealing her breath. Just then, headlights swept across the drive. Joseph's SUV pulled in, and he was out of the car before she could call his name. "I've got you," he murmured, wrapping an arm around her, steadying her as he helped her into the seat. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what Allison already knew. She was in labor. At 39 weeks, her body had decided it was time. She had dilated 3 centimeters, and though the doctor assured her the baby was healthy and strong, the reality hit Allison like a wave. She was about to meet her daughter. Brooke and Marcus set out at dawn, but an accident on the freeway left them stuck in traffic. Carol promised she'd be there by evening. Until then, it was Joseph who never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, murmuring steady encouragement, his voice anchoring her through the storm of pain. When the nurses urged her to breathe, his hand squeezed hers, grounding her. Hours later, as the final push came and the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room, Allison's tears blurred everything. They placed her daughter on her chest, her tiny body warm and fragile, and the world seemed to stop. "Madison," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My sweet girl." Joseph stood beside her, his face soft with awe, his hand brushing hers as though to steady both of them. He looked at Madison not with the distant politeness of a neighbor, but with the quiet pride of someone who already belonged. Brooke and Marcus rushed in an hour later, their relief palpable as they held the baby in turn, their eyes shining. Carol arrived that evening, gathering Allison and Madison into her arms as though she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. But when Allison glanced at Joseph, still lingering quietly at her side, she knew he'd been her anchor through it all, and somewhere deep inside, she couldn't deny the truth. Her life had changed forever in more ways than one. The hospital felt safe, cocooned in its bright lights and bustling nurses, but walking through her front door with Madison in her arms made everything suddenly real. The world outside seemed quieter, darker, and so much heavier. The house that once echoed with silence now pulsed with the small, fragile sounds of a newborn, soft cries, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Carol had returned just in time, bustling about like a general in charge of operations. She unpacked the diaper bag, arranged bottles neatly on the counter, and double-checked that Allison had everything she might need within reach. "You focus on that baby," she instructed firmly, "and let us handle the rest." Joseph was just as steady, slipping easily into the rhythm of the household. He carried in the car seat, fetched extra blankets, and kept Rusty from pacing too close to the bassinet. When Allison shifted uncomfortably in her chair, still sore from the delivery, Joseph was there in an instant, adjusting pillows behind her back. The first evening stretched long and uncertain. Madison's cries seemed to come every few minutes. Allison's exhaustion pressed down on her, and though she had waited for this moment, she couldn't help the tears that stung her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered to Carol, her voice raw. Carol placed a hand on her shoulder. "Every new mother feels that way. You're not alone, Allison, and you never will be." Later, as the house quieted, Allison stepped out of the bathroom and froze. In the glow of the lamp, Joseph was cradling Madison in his arms, swaying gently as he hummed under his breath. His large hands supported her tiny body with ease, his gaze fixed on her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever held. Allison's heart twisted. For a moment, the ache of Ethan's absence returned, sharper than ever. This was the image she had longed for, her husband holding their child, the family they had dreamed of. Guilt crashed over her like a wave. This isn't how it was supposed to be. But then Joseph looked up, catching her watching. He smiled softly, not with expectation or claim, but with a quiet reassurance that eased some of the weight from her chest. Rusty thumped his tail against the floor, as though agreeing with the unspoken bond forming in the room. Allison blinked back tears, crossing the floor to sit beside him. "You didn't have to stay tonight," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I wanted to," Joseph replied simply. He glanced down at Madison, who had settled into peaceful sleep against his chest. "She's perfect. And you're stronger than you think." The words struck deep, and Allison felt something shift inside her. This wasn't pity. It wasn't convenience. Joseph was here because he wanted to be, because somewhere along the way, her battles had become his too. Later that night, when Carol insisted she rest, Allison curled into bed with Madison beside her in the bassinet. Through the cracked door, she saw Joseph stretched on the couch, Rusty at his feet, both keeping watch as though guarding the fragile peace of their new world. For the first time in months, Allison allowed herself to close her eyes, without fear. Her daughter was safe. She was not alone, perhaps the beginning of a new kind of love. The days after Madison's homecoming blurred into a rhythm of cries, feedings, and restless naps. Joseph never seemed far. If Rusty was her golden shadow, Joseph had become the quiet anchor in her storm. He showed up with groceries without being asked, took turns pacing the living room with Madison when her cries wouldn't stop, and somehow managed to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen between bottle warming. One evening, as Madison fussed, Allison finally gave in to exhaustion. Joseph offered to take her, and Allison sat back watching as he gently rocked the baby. Madison quieted almost instantly, her tiny body curling into him like he was the safest place in the world. The sight made Allison's throat tighten. "You don't have to keep doing this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't your responsibility." Joseph looked up, his expression unreadable. "I know I don't have to," he said evenly. "I want to." She turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Ethan, like if I let you in, even just as a friend, I'm erasing him." Joseph didn't argue, didn't try to soothe her with empty words. He only stepped closer, placing Madison gently in her arms. His voice was quiet but firm. "Nothing could erase him. He'll always be a part of you, of Madison. That doesn't mean you don't deserve help, or peace, or—" He stopped himself, shaking his head as though the rest of the words were too much, too soon. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Madison's soft breathing. Allison wanted to tell him she understood, wanted to confess the confusing warmth building in her chest every time he was near. But the guilt was still too sharp, the grief still too raw. The following afternoon, sun poured gently through the kitchen window, casting warm light across the table where Allison sat with Carol. Madison napped peacefully in her bassinet nearby, her tiny breaths a soft rhythm in the quiet. Allison turned her teacup in her hands, staring into the swirling amber liquid, her thoughts heavy. "Carol," she began slowly, her voice fragile, "I don't know how to do this anymore." Carol set down her own cup, giving her full attention. "Do what, dear?" "Grieve. Move forward. All of it." Allison's eyes brimmed with tears. "I feel like I'm trapped between two worlds. Part of me is still standing at Ethan's grave, unable to let go. And part of me feels something shifting with Joseph. And that terrifies me. What kind of woman falls for someone else when she hasn't even stopped aching for her? Husband?" Carol reached across the table, folding Allison's hands into her own. "A woman who's still alive. A woman who's carrying new life in her arms every day. Allison, grief isn't a straight road. It doesn't end, not really. It softens, it changes shape, but it never leaves us. You'll always love Ethan. You'll always wish he was here, but loving again, if that happens, isn't a betrayal. It's survival. It's grace. Allison's tears slipped free, her shoulders shaking. But how do I know it's not just loneliness, that I'm not just clinging to Joseph because he's here, because I need someone? Carol's smile was sad, but sure. Loneliness doesn't look like what I see in Joseph's eyes when he watches you, and it doesn't look like the way you light up, even when you try to hide it. When he walks into the room, you don't need me to tell you what's real. In time, you'll know it yourself. That evening, when the house was quiet again, Allison found herself dialing Brooke's number. Her sister answered on the first ring. "Allie, you okay?" Allison curled into the corner of the couch, lowering her voice so as not to wake Madison. "I don't know, Brooke. I'm struggling with the grief, with Joseph. I don't know how to carry all of it." On the other end, Brooke was silent for a beat, then spoke gently. "You don't have to carry it all at once. Grief is heavy. It'll always be with you, but it doesn't mean you can't carry something else too, like joy or love or hope. They don't cancel each other out." Allison pressed her forehead into her palm. "I keep thinking about Ethan, about how we planned everything, and now Joseph is just here, helping, steady. And I feel things I don't want to admit. It feels wrong." Brooke's tone sharpened with love. "Wrong? Allie, it's been months. You've fought through every single day, rebuilding your life. If Joseph makes that burden lighter, if he makes you feel even a flicker of peace, that's not wrong. That's a gift. You don't have to define it right now, just let it be." For the first time, Allison allowed herself to exhale, as though some of the weight had shifted. "So, you don't think I'm betraying Ethan?" "No," Brooke said, firmly. "You're honoring him by living, and Madison deserves to see her mother alive, not buried under sorrow." Allison closed her eyes, clutching the phone tighter. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to move forward, even if her heart still carried Ethan with her. The clinic was small but bustling, the low hum of voices and the sharp scent of antiseptic filling the air. Allison sat stiffly in the waiting room, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Joseph balanced Madison with practiced ease, one arm tucked securely around the baby, while the diaper bag hung over his shoulder, as though he had been doing it for years. When the nurse called their name, they followed her into the exam room. The space was bright, decorated with cheerful posters of cartoon animals, but Allison's stomach churned with dread. Madison cooed softly in Joseph's arms, completely unaware of what was coming. They settled into the chairs, Joseph still holding. Allison watching his steady grip and wondering how he made it look so effortless. They didn't speak. Nerves had sealed both their lips. When Nurse Linda entered, she smiled knowingly, her eyes flicking between the two of them. "First round of immunizations, Let me guess. First-time parents?" Allison's cheeks flushed. But before she could correct her, Joseph chuckled nervously. "You could say that." Linda nodded kindly, setting down the tray with the syringe. "All right, one quick pinch and it'll be over. Now, who wants to hold her during the shot? Mommy or Daddy?" Allison froze. The word mommy sent her heart into a spiral of fear and guilt. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. All she could think about was her baby's pain, the needle, the inevitable cry. She couldn't bear it. "I got her," Joseph said quickly, his voice steady but soft. He pulled Madison closer against his chest, bracing her tiny thigh as Linda swabbed the skin. It happened in seconds. The quick jab, Madison's sharp cry piercing the room like glass breaking. Allison's heart clenched, tears filling her eyes. But when she glanced at Joseph, the sight undid her completely. His face had flushed red, his jaw clenched as he blinked rapidly, fighting his own tears. "Hey, sweetheart," he murmured hoarsely, lifting Madison against his shoulder, patting her back gently. His voice broke as he whispered, "I've got you, it's okay. It's all over now." Madison's cries gradually softened into hiccups, her tiny fingers clutching Joseph's shirt. Allison pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to speak. It wasn't just that Joseph had stepped in. It was the way he had looked, the way his whole body had bent to comfort her child as though she were his own. The nurse gave them both a reassuring smile. "She did beautifully. So did you. First shots are always harder on the parents than the baby." Neither Allison nor Joseph responded. The moment was too raw, too heavy. The drive home was quiet. Madison slept in her car seat, her face still, blotchy from tears. Allison sat in the back beside her, watching Joseph's hands on the wheel, his knuckles still pale from gripping too tightly. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to say how much it meant to see him step into that moment without hesitation, how much it scared her and comforted her all at once. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, they drove in silence, the weight of the day hanging between them. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Rusty was waiting at the porch as always. Joseph parked the SUV, glanced back at Madison, then at Allison. His voice was rough, but certain. "She's tougher than both of us." Allison met his eyes, and for the first time she saw her reflection there, not as a grieving widow, but as a mother learning how to stand again, with someone steady at her side. The evening after, Madison's immunization felt heavier than most. The baby slept soundly in her bassinet, exhausted from the long day. But Allison found no such peace. She sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the faint glow of the fireplace. Joseph came in quietly from the kitchen, drying, his hands on a dish towel. Rusty trailed behind him and settled at Allison's feet, his head heavy against her leg. For a long moment, Joseph simply watched her, as if waiting for permission to sit. Finally, he lowered himself onto the couch across from her, his hands clasped together. "Allison," he began, but she cut him off, her voice soft but urgent. "I need to say this." She took a shaky breath, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her sweater. "When Madison cried today, when she looked so small and fragile, I froze. I couldn't move. All I could think about was her pain, and I hated myself for not being strong enough. But then you—" Her voice broke. "You didn't even hesitate. You held her like she was your own. You comforted her when I couldn't. That meant more to me than I can explain." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she forced herself to meet his gaze. "But it also scared me, Joseph, because I realized how much I'm starting to depend on you. And I don't know if it's fair. Ethan hasn't been gone that long. Part of me feels like I'm betraying him just by saying this." Joseph leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "Allison, listen to me. Loving again doesn't erase Ethan. It never will. I would never try to take his place in your heart, but I can't keep pretending either." He drew in a shaky breath. "I'm in love with you." The room went silent, except for the soft crackle of the fire. Allison's heart pounded in her ears as Joseph pressed on. "I've tried to hold it back, to just be what you needed, nothing more. But every day I spend with you, with Madison, I can't deny it anymore. I want to be here. I want to be the one who steadies you when you fall apart, the one who helps you raise her. If you'll let me, Allison, I want to be Madison's father." Allison's tears spilled freely now, her chest aching with the weight of his words. She looked down at her hands, then toward the bassinet where Madison slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging in her mother's heart. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready. My heart is still broken, Joseph. Ethan will always be a part of me." Joseph reached across the space, taking her trembling hand in his. His touch was warm, steady. "I know, and I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you, even with that grief, to let me love you both in the ways I know how. We can take it slow, Allison, as slow as you need. But just know, I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to pull away, but instead she tightened her grip on his hand, tears falling faster. For the first time since Ethan's death, she allowed herself to whisper the words that had been buried deep in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for love again, but I think I want to try." Joseph's eyes closed briefly, relief washing over him. When he opened them, the warmth there was almost too much for Allison to bear, and as Rusty lifted his head, thumping his tail softly against the rug, Allison realized her little family might be expanding in ways she hadn't dared dream. That weekend, the house felt fuller than usual. Brooke and Marcus arrived late Friday night, arms loaded with groceries and baby gifts. By Saturday morning, the men had decided to try their luck fishing at the lake outside town, Joseph grinning as he loaded the gear, while Marcus teased him about being a city guy in disguise. Rusty trotted along happily, tail wagging as if he were part of the crew. With the house quiet, the women gravitated to the kitchen table. Carol brewed a pot of tea, and Brooke sliced into a loaf of warm bread she had brought. Madison slept in, her bassinet nearby, her little fists rising and falling with each gentle breath. Allison's hands stilled on her teacup, her eyes lingering on her daughter's peaceful face. "I need to tell you both something," she said softly. Brooke's brows lifted, but her eyes softened with encouragement. "Go on, baby girl." Allison took a shaky breath. "The other night, Joseph told me he loves me, and that he wants to be Madison's father if I'll let him." Brooke's face broke into a wide smile, her eyes shining. "Oh, Allie, that makes me so happy for you. You and Madison deserve this. You deserve to be loved unconditionally. Ethan would want that for you." Tears blurred Allison's vision, but her heart felt lighter hearing her sister's words. She turned toward Carol, who was dabbing at her own eyes with a napkin. "And you," Allison said, her voice thick with emotion, "you've been like a mother to me from the very first day. Thank you for stepping in, for holding me when I couldn't hold myself together." Carol reached across the table, taking her hand. "Allison, you don't have to thank me. Do you know what this means to me? I'm finally getting a daughter. Thank you for opening your heart and seeing the man my Joseph is. I've prayed he would find someone who truly understood his worth." The three women sat together, their hands linked across the table as tears rolled freely, not tears of sorrow this time, but of gratitude and hope. For the first time since Ethan's passing, Allison cried without feeling crushed. These were cleansing tears, tears that washed away just enough of the grief to make room for joy. Brooke leaned over and smoothed a hand over her niece's blanket. "She's going to grow up surrounded by so much love. That's all any child needs." Allison smiled through her tears, her chest swelling with both relief and anticipation. Maybe life hadn't gone the way she planned. Maybe it had taken everything from her before giving something new. But here she was, at a kitchen table surrounded by women who loved her, a daughter sleeping within arm's reach, and a man out, fishing, who had pledged himself to her and Madison. 6 months later, life in Sunny Ridge had found its rhythm. Allison was stronger now, Madison was thriving, and Joseph's presence had woven itself so naturally into their days that Allison sometimes wondered how she had ever managed without him. Still, life had its moments of fear. One evening, Madison grew restless, her tiny body burning with fever. Allison rushed her to the clinic, her heart pounding as the thermometer confirmed what she dreaded. But the doctor smiled gently, reassuring them. "It's just a virus. She'll be uncomfortable for a few days, but she's strong. Keep her hydrated, let her rest. She'll be just fine." Relief flooded Allison's body, though exhaustion weighed her down as she carried Madison back home. Joseph never left her side. He gathered medicine, blankets, and anything else she might need before settling on the couch with Madison tucked in his arms. That night, as the fever kept Madison fussy, Allison turned to Joseph, her voice trembling with weariness. "Stay. Please just stay tonight." Without hesitation, he nodded. Together they laid Madison between them in Allison's bed, the baby's tiny hands clutching at the blanket. Joseph watched as Allison curled close, gently stroking her daughter's fingers until her own eyes drifted shut. He stayed awake longer, his gaze shifting between the two of them, mother and child, and something deep inside him stirred. For the first time in years, he felt whole. When Allison woke the next morning, sunlight spilled softly across the room. Her first thought was for Madison, but when she moved her hand, something glinted in the light. She gasped softly. A ring. Her heart raced as she sat up, staring at the delicate band now resting on her finger. The sound of humming drifted from the living room. She followed it, her breath caught in her throat. There was Joseph, sitting in the old rocking chair, Madison asleep against his chest. His voice was low, tender, carrying the tune of a lullaby. His eyes softened when he saw Allison. She sat down beside him, extending her hand wordlessly, the ring gleaming. He glanced at it, a shy but steady smile curving his lips. "It looks good on you." Her eyes glistened with tears, but her voice carried both teasing and sincerity. "Are you going to ask me properly, or do I just keep wearing it until you do?" Joseph chuckled, though his throat bobbed with emotion. With Madison still nestled safely against him, he lowered himself to one knee before her, his free hand trembling as it took hers. "Allison," he said softly, his voice thick with feeling, "I've loved you long before I dared admit it. You've shown me strength, grace, and what it means to hope again. I love Madison as if she were my own, and I want nothing more than to build a life with both of you. Will you marry me?" Allison's tears spilled over as she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his for the first time. The kiss was soft, trembling, but filled with all the emotion she had held back for so long. When she pulled away, her answer came easily, without hesitation. "Yes." Joseph closed his eyes briefly, relief and joy mingling on his face. Rusty padded into the room, tail wagging, as if he too had been waiting for this moment. 2 months passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Allison had imagined something small, simple, just her sister, Carol, Marcus, and a few close neighbors. But Joseph had other plans. Vendors came to the house, florists took measurements for garlands, and musicians were booked without Allison even lifting a finger. She watched it all unfold in awe and slight disbelief. One afternoon, just days before the wedding, Allison found herself sitting at the kitchen table with Carol and Brooke, the sounds of Madison's giggles floating in from the living room where Marcus played peekaboo with her. "He's gone overboard," Allison admitted, shaking her head with a half-smile. "I told him I just wanted something simple, but he's planned a whole event. There are caterers, photographers, even a string quartet. Who does that for a wedding in Sunny Ridge?" Carol chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "A man who wants nothing but the best for you, that's who. He's waited a long time for this, Allison. Let him give you the joy you deserve." Brooke raised a brow and leaned in, her voice teasing but curious. "You really don't know, do you?" Allison blinked. "Know what?" "How much Joseph is worth." Allison shrugged. "No, not really. I mean, I know he sold his company, but we've never talked about it. I was too deep in my grief to care, and he never offered details." Carol smiled knowingly. "Well, sweetheart, let me put it this way. Whatever figure you imagine, it's plenty more than you could ever spend in a lifetime. And that man would happily spend every dime making you and Madison smile." The three women laughed, the tension breaking. Brooke squeezed Allison's hand. "You got lucky twice in your life, Allie. Don't waste time worrying about the money. Just love him back." Allison's throat tightened with emotion, but she managed a nod. Brooke tilted her head, her expression playful again. "So, after the wedding, are you two going to find your own place?" Allison glanced around the kitchen, the walls she had scrubbed that first night, The back porch with its wildflowers, the nursery painted with Joseph's steady hands. Her lips curved into a soft smile. Why would we? This house is our home. It's where Joseph grew up, where Madison has found her roots. We've been doing just fine here, Carol's voice rang with certainty. That's right. And besides, I plan on spoiling that little girl every chance I get. Can't do that. If you move away. They all laughed again, Madison's babbling from the living room adding to the joy of the moment. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, the small town of Sunny Ridge buzzing with excitement. The churchyard was draped in flowers, ribbons fluttered in the breeze, and neighbors arrived carrying homemade desserts and gifts. It seemed the entire community had shown up, eager to celebrate the woman who had become one of their own, and the man who had quietly cared for her long before she realized. As Allison stood at the back of the aisle, Brooke fussing over her veil, she felt her breath catch. She never imagined she would stand here again, her heart open, her life ready to begin anew. And yet, here she was, her daughter nestled in Carol's arms, her sister smiling proudly, her soon-to-be husband waiting at the altar with eyes only. For her, when the music began, Allison stepped forward, each stride steady. The whispers of the crowd faded, replaced by the thundering beat of her heart. Joseph's face lit with awe as she drew closer, his love written plain for everyone to see. Sunny Ridge rejoiced with them, their cheers echoing long after the vows were spoken. And as Joseph slipped the ring onto her finger, Allison knew she was home. The reception had stretched late into the evening, filled with laughter, music, and the joyful hum of Sunny Ridge's small-town spirit. Children twirled on the dance floor, neighbors clinked glasses in toasts, and Madison, dressed in a tiny white dress Carol had insisted on, was passed lovingly from lap to lap like the town's newest treasure. By the time Allison and Joseph finally returned home, the house was still, the night air cool and quiet. Rusty greeted them with a thump of his tail, then curled back onto his bed, as though he knew tonight belonged to them. Allison slipped off her shoes in the foyer, sighing with relief. Her wedding dress shimmered faintly in the soft light. Though the long day had left it wrinkled, Joseph stood behind her, his tie undone, his eyes fixed on her as though he still couldn't believe she was his. Exhausted, he asked gently. Completely, she admitted with a tired smile. She added softly, but happy. They moved into the living room, where the glow of the fireplace painted the room in warm amber. Joseph helped her settle onto the couch, then disappeared for a moment, returning with 2 glasses of water. He handed her one before sitting beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The quiet felt different tonight, not heavy with grief, not tentative, but full of peace. Madison was asleep in her crib, safe and loved. The vows had been spoken. They were husband and wife. Allison turned her hand, staring at the ring glittering, faintly in the firelight. I never thought I'd wear another ring, she whispered. Joseph's hand covered hers, steady and warm. I know, and I never want you to feel like Ethan's memory has been replaced. He'll always be part of you. But tonight, I just want you to know I'm here. Fully, forever. For you, and for Madison. She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Soap, smoke from the fire, something steady that she had come to rely on. You saved me, Joseph, she whispered. Not just with Madison, not just with the house. You saved me from drowning in grief. I don't think I'll ever stop missing Ethan, but with you, I feel like I can breathe again. Joseph pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his voice low and raw. And you saved me too, Allison. You and Madison, you gave me back my purpose. For years, I thought my life had already peaked, that I'd lost too much to start again. But then I found you, and suddenly, everything made sense. They sat like that for a long while, the fire crackling softly, their hands entwined. At last, Allison lifted her head, meeting his gaze. The vulnerability in his eyes mirrored her own. Slowly, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss deepened, not rushed, not desperate, but full of promise. It was a seal, a vow beyond the one spoken at the altar. When they finally pulled apart, Allison rested her forehead against his. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Joseph smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We are. Together. Always. And in the quiet of their home, with the fire glowing and their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, Allison allowed herself to believe it. Her past and present had finally found a way to coexist, and her future was something she could step into with hope. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Help support our channel with comments, and don't forget to subscribe.